This video is brought to you in partnership with Careerist. If you're anything like me, you're always looking to better yourself, learn something new, try something different. When that feeling extends to honing a new and rewarding set of skills that may lead to a very fine paycheck, well, that's where Careerist comes in. Careerist is an online learning platform that can teach you how to develop your own websites, create apps, test the software that powers those websites, and utilize those skills to implement computer systems for large companies. Skilled Careerist advisors will help you choose your path of study, help you to find 100% remote internships when your course is completed, provide one-on-one mentorship along the way, in addition to assisting in your dream job search. What's more, most courses can be completed in under 6 months. As a very special promotion, sign up through the link on screen and get up to $250 off the course of your choosing, and start your journey towards an exciting and rewarding future today. This happened to me a few years ago, right before the pandemic hit. In fact, I know the exact date because it spooked me to my core. It was February 18th, 2020. I was 14 years old, so you can imagine that this was a pretty frightening moment for a young girl. My mother, younger brother, and I went to go see a movie. He wanted to see the new Sonic film, and I didn't really want to, so I went to see the Birds of Prey movie with Harley Quinn in an adjacent theater by myself. I had already seen the movie, but quite frankly I wanted to see it again, with the addition of popcorn and a movie theater hot dog. I had gone off by myself to the viewing room, and it was completely empty at this point. Just me in there, so I felt relatively safe being able to see the whole room, given that I was at the very top. It's pretty nice having the entire showing to yourself, not having to check a laugh that may come from you, or worrying about the crunching that comes from your snacks. It's pretty awesome. That is, until it's not. About halfway through the film, I went to the restroom. That soda went right through me. Just like in the movie, I was once again the only person in the restroom. Every room was in current running progress, so nobody wanted to miss the films that they were in. As I was finishing up, there was an elderly woman at the sink. About 70 is what I would guess. I thought I had been alone, but I suppose not. She was washing her hands right next to me. She had moved from her original spot. Now, for context, before I say what she said to me, I'll give you a brief description of myself. I have black hair, green eyes, relatively sharp features, high cheekbones, and arched brows. Yeah, a typical Disney villain, which I somewhat blame for her response. While I have a high sense of self-worth, and I find myself beautiful, I don't think that I'm anything worth losing marbles over. She had looked at me with the most subtle yet unnerving grin, still with her hands under the water, but not doing any washing. She said, "Young lady, you're gorgeous." I said thank you, and she went on to say, "A beauty like that is only something an evil thing could have. Your eyes, they're just so hollow and soulless." She continued with that same damn smile. I was seriously starting to get creeped out, but I do live in the Bible Belt, so I initially chalked it up to her being a religious nutjob. But then she got closer, leaned in and said, without that smile, "You shouldn't have that beauty." I hurried and left as soon as I possibly could. I didn't like the feeling of being left alone with that woman anymore. I made it outside to the lobby of the theater, where there were plenty of people, far enough away from that bathroom door to feel safe, yet close enough where I could still see it. I waited for about 5 minutes in the lobby, and that woman never came out. I eventually went back to my theater and was paranoid the entire rest of the film. I couldn't get that crazy lady out of my head. Like, who says that to a kid? She seriously made me consider finding a priest to exorcise me after that encounter. I told my mother what had happened later that night, and that was the last time she let me go alone to the bathroom until I was at least 16. Never do I want to see that woman again. I still get paranoid any time that I'm alone in a public restroom now. In fact, I try to avoid them altogether. Countless times I've re-examined those shared moments with that woman in that restroom, but I still can't figure out what she wanted, or even worse, what she had planned if I didn't hurriedly remove myself from that situation. In 2017, I was an undergrad living with 3 other students in a rough student house in the big city. For context, on the layout of the house, this will probably be beneficial for the story. My bedroom was the only one on the ground floor, beside the front door, and opposite of the kitchen. We only had a front door and front windows, no back door. My bed was in the middle of the room. The bottom of the bed was facing the bedroom door. There were 3 floors in total, 2 bedrooms on the second, and another bedroom and sitting room on the third. One June evening, we all decided to head out with a few other friends for a big drunken night out in town to simultaneously celebrate end of exams, my 21st birthday, and one last hurrah before everyone went back home or went traveling for the summer. I'm not a huge clubber, so me and my then boyfriend were ready to go home at around 1, maybe 1:30 a.m. We hitched an Uber back, drunkenly got takeout, and passed out in bed around 2, maybe 2:30. At 4:30 a.m., we were both jolted awake by one of my housemates slamming open the door and exclaiming, "We've been robbed." We rubbed our eyes in bewilderment because neither of us had woken up to such a thing, and perhaps she was just playing some terrible prank. Surely, given our proximity to the front door, we would have heard something, right? We walked upstairs to discover the upstairs rooms were largely ransacked and items were missing. Everyone's electricals that weren't on them were gone, like laptops, iPads, cameras. Passports were all gone, and my housemate's weed stash was taken as well. A baseball cap from the girl whose room was on the 3rd floor was found in another person's bedroom on the 2nd floor, meaning the intruder wore the cap and took it off as they proceeded through the house. It then hit me. What about my room? I raced downstairs to check my belongings and discovered that my purse at the bottom of my bed was missing, and my ex's phone and wallet that were also at the bottom of the bed were taken. My laptop was on the bedside table beside me and was untouched. The intruder or intruders managed to break open the front door, go through the entire house, ransack rooms looking for things to steal, and actually open the door of the bedroom we were sleeping in to take things right in front of the bed we were in. We never woke up to any of it. To say I was shaken when I found out what happened would be an absolute understatement. The police came to take our statements and file a report, but nothing ever came of it. To this day, I'm still super uneasy to go to bed in an empty house after that night. I am thankful, however, that we didn't wake up during the middle of that robbery, and that I didn't go home alone that night, because the outcome could have been very different from what it was. My husband and I like to go for walks after dinner. The neighborhood we live in is generally safe, even when walking around after dark, so we've never been guarded or felt afraid. One night during our walk, about 8:30 p.m., a woman coming towards us began arguing with the man she was walking with. It was a pretty heated argument, but something about it felt like they were putting on a show for us. The street we do our nightly walks on has a slight incline, so we could see them coming downhill towards us. I actually noticed her from a little over a block away because her outfit looked familiar to me. A few months before this, a woman wearing a pink fake fur jacket with one of her shoulders exposed and a tank top kept trying to jokingly take my husband's pizza box away from him when we were waiting to cross the street, saying, "Oh my God, thank you, I'm starving." So when I saw this woman up the street coming towards us, wearing a similar style jacket, the first thing I thought was, I wonder if it's the same one that tried to take our pizza. As soon as they reached us, they went from completely quiet to screaming at each other. It was like they hit their marks on the stage and someone yelled action, and they began their rehearsed fight. They were so loud I could see people on the other side of the street looking over at them. So I thought if they had been arguing like this all along, we definitely would have heard them long before we saw them. The two of them also switched the direction they were walking in. Originally, they were walking towards us. But as soon as they reached us and began their fight, they turned around and walked alongside us. They also boxed us in, the woman walking slightly in front of us to the left of my husband, and the guy yelling at her from behind me to the right. I could tell my husband was freaked out too, because of the vice grip he had on my hand. "Get away from me, Josh," the woman screamed. "We broke up. God, leave me alone." "Why are you like this? Always starting shit in public," the man yelled. They kept pace with us. I tried walking faster to get away from them, but they just sped up too. When we reached the intersection, even though we had the light, I pulled on my husband to stop for a bit, just to see what would happen. They both stopped as well. They clearly weren't anticipating the stop because they actually continued walking a bit more, and then stopped suddenly when they realized we were standing still. The funny thing is, as soon as we all stopped, I saw a brief look of confusion flash over her face, and they stood at the corner for a few seconds, staring at each other, completely quiet, like they weren't sure what was going on. And then, like they heard someone yell action once more, they resumed their yelling. On top of all of that, the man who was with her wore an outfit that was head to toe dark colors, like black or navy blue, a hoodie pulled down almost to his eyes, and one of those combo neck face mask things pulled up past his nose. He was basically dressed like a ninja in 60-degree Fahrenheit weather. I know we're in COVID times, but that outfit was overkill. He definitely looked like he was trying to hide his face. I did consider that maybe she was walking alongside us because she was genuinely scared. It was the reason I didn't just leave and pull my husband away with me. She'd call out to us every now and then and say, "You see what I have to put up with? He won't leave me alone." "Hey," I said after this happened a few times, "come with us to X Avenue. There's a bunch of stores and restaurants there still open. Lots of people, so it'll be safer." She ignored me every time. Just when I decided that this had to be fake, she suddenly asked my husband to tell the masked man to leave her alone. And my husband told him, "Dude, I think you should back off and give her some space. Whatever's going on, you're not helping." And just like that, the creepy ninja guy left. He didn't put up a fight. He didn't tell my husband to mind his own business. Nothing. He just yelled, "I want my stuff back, Jessica," as he ran off. I found it strange he gave up so easily. The woman thanked my husband, but then begged us to walk her back home on Y Avenue because she was scared he'd be waiting for her outside of her building. We immediately said no. Between where we were and Y Avenue were a lot of small playgrounds, churches, schools, and parking lots of offices that were closed by then. Basically, if we walked her home, we'd be passing by a lot of dark, unpopulated places where someone could easily jump out and get the drop on us. And there would be nobody around to hear us scream. I suggested over and over we walk to X Avenue instead, which would have us walking through well-populated residential neighborhoods, and we could even wait in a store together while she called for a police officer to escort her to a friend's place. But she actually said, "Yeah, but that's in the opposite direction of where I live, and that's really inconvenient for me. I'd end up having to walk so much more." Who picks convenience over not getting potentially kidnapped and killed? Also, if you knew your creepy psycho ninja boyfriend was going to be waiting for you, why would you go home instead of staying with a friend? She also kept telling us her address. "I just need you to walk me to my building, number 1234 on Y Avenue, apartment 3B, or something like that. Like she was trying to reassure us that we would really be escorting her to a real place, and that this definitely was not a plan to rob us or harvest our organs. After several times of us offering to walk her to a restaurant or 24-hour drugstore, she finally said that she was calling her mother to get her. She pulled out a cell phone and quickly walked away from us. "Hey, we can wait with you here until your mom picks you up," my husband called out after her. She didn't answer though. We watched her until she turned a corner and disappeared. I know it sounds crazy, but even after that, I still wasn't completely convinced it was fake. I still felt guilty. Maybe she needed our help, and we let her down. Maybe she was following us because she felt safer around a couple. Maybe they didn't really box us in. Maybe she just put us between her and him so he couldn't grab her. After we arrived home, and for a few days afterwards, my husband and I really struggled with whether we had just left a poor woman alone to contend with an abusive, stalker boyfriend. But the way she and the man that she was with acted, it felt much more like a scam than somebody trying to escape an abusive partner. She was more concerned with convenience than safety. She wouldn't take our offer to accompany her down a safer, more populated path to a public place. And she didn't even want us to wait with her while she called her mother. Plus, the guy's outfit was really suspicious. It seemed like he wanted to be sure none of his features were visible. Pretty much all of my friends thought it was a scam too. But I still wondered. I still felt bad. Like a lot of people who post on this subreddit, been made to feel unsafe by creepy people in the past. So if I see someone in a similar situation, if I can, I want to help them get to safety. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember that not everyone who appears to be a victim actually is one. Some people may try to take advantage of your kindness and empathy to steal from you, or worse. Be safe out there. This story takes place almost a year ago. I was an opener at a resort, clocking in before 5 a.m. each day. The resort itself is located inside of an affluent neighborhood in a very wealthy suburb. Employees had to park in one of two parking lots at either ends of the property, and the lot that I chose was adjacent to a long and windy road outside the resort, which led to the rest of the neighborhood. The road and resort were separated by a short range of brush and trees that I wasn't accustomed to seeing anybody walk through. I'd arrived one morning per usual and put the car into park with my headlights still on. The lights of the lot weren't ever on in the morning, since no one else really showed up before 6 a.m. when the sun began to come up, so it was usually dark at the start of my walk. Save for security, I was one of the first employees to arrive on the property each morning, and was usually completely alone in this particular parking lot at the time. This morning didn't seem any different. I had my hand on the keys and the ignition, my brain in the process to turn off the car, when I noticed a young girl, maybe 14 or 15 years old, come scampering. Her body language was the exact definition, running with quick light steps through the span of trees that separates the resort from the outside road. She was directly in front of my car. My headlights illuminated a clear view of her in the pitch black. She looked like she was in high school, had long, blonde hair, and was wearing a jacket with pajamas maybe, like she'd just walked out of a house. One thing about her that bothered me was that she wouldn't stop laughing and smiling. I couldn't hear her laughing from outside the car, but she was very visibly giggling at something I wasn't aware of or could not see. It just felt so unnatural. She occasionally glanced behind her as if someone else were there waiting away from the headlights. She then waved at me like it were a normal gesture at this time, and immediately ran to my passenger side door. This all happened over the course of a few seconds, and I wasn't really sure what was happening besides my anxiety spiking. I know that I simultaneously yanked the auxiliary cord from my phone to shut whatever song had been playing off, while grabbing for the lock button on my door. I remember feeling panic for never remembering if it's up or down to lock, when the girl began pulling violently and incessantly on the door handle. I realized because I didn't turn my car off, it had luckily stayed locked. She began pounding on the window at this point, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs for her to leave before pressing on my horn. I could see her laughing outside like this were some type of game, as if I were a silly friend not letting her in as some sort of joke. After a few seconds, she stopped pounding and trying to open the car door. Her face fell flat like I had disappointed her, and she started to walk away from the car, back the way that she came. She waved at me one more time before squeezing through the trees, out of view of my headlights. This whole encounter confused me almost as much as it scared me. Most of the people that I told the story to just chalked it up to her being on drugs. But that narrative hasn't felt right to me despite her behavior. Maybe she was just being an extremely out-of-touch teenager whose parents need a firmer grip on her. My thought was possibly human trafficking, but I'm not sure if that would fit this scenario, as I'm not the most well-versed with the subject. I told someone once I made it to the office of my job, but they didn't seem to care much. I didn't call the police, and I regret that. I'll never get out of my brain, though, how off the feeling was watching a stranger, seemingly alone, pop out from the trees in the darkness, laughing, and then trying to violently enter my car in an empty parking lot. I do think the possibility of someone else being present the whole time is a lot more scary, and it makes me wonder, just who else was out there with her? I cut my hair every 3 or 4 years. I never do anything with it. No blow dry, no color product. So it's what they call in the hair selling business, virgin hair. It's ideal for making hair pieces because it isn't very damaged. I sell about 10 to 12 inches on eBay each time I cut it, and donate part of the money to Wigs for Kids, which makes hair pieces at no cost for young cancer patients. I used to donate my actual hair to Locks for Love, but they're super picky about what they use and apparently end up throwing a lot away. I'm very curious about the weird things people do, so I once asked a buyer what she planned to do with the hair. She said she makes smaller hair pieces for people with partial hair loss. I thought that was cool. About 5 years ago, I listed my ponytail, and someone bought it for $50. Then I made the mistake of asking this person what they were going to use it for, thinking I would get a similar answer. He told me this very strange story about how he was volunteering at an after-school program at the library. They had read some book about cancer, and now he was buying the hair to show the kids what they make wigs out of. This made absolutely no sense to me. I thought that was odd. But people are ultimately odd. So I printed out the postage, packaged up my hair, and got ready to ship it out. Then I get a message from him with a link to my profile on my workplace's website, asking if this was me. He said he wanted to know more about me, why I was selling my hair, and so on. I officially freaked out. I Googled the buyer's name. I found out that he was actually 16 years old, and his parents were high-powered government attorneys. I cross-referenced this with property records linked to the address on his eBay buyer profile. I found out where he went to high school, and even located his original birth announcement from 2002. I contacted him through eBay to say that I was no longer comfortable selling to him. I contacted eBay, who suspended his account because he was underage. He made another account and sent me a message, begging for me to sell him the hair. I ignored him. I even had to eat the shipping cost, which was annoying. I thought that was the end of it, though. Days later at work, I'm checking my email. We have a VoIP voicemail system that sends an email every time someone calls, and it includes some caller ID information if it's available. I recognized the name immediately from my background investigation. The kid had called my work voicemail from his mom's home phone, and her name was in my freaking work email. The voicemail itself? Blank. I was very worried he was going to continue calling my workplace, so I had to tell my 65-year-old boss the entire story. It was quite embarrassing, and I'm sure it all sounded utterly ridiculous. Thankfully, I didn't hear from him again, that I know of at least. But I've always wondered what the heck that guy was thinking, and what he was actually going to do with my hair. Now skip ahead 3 years. I sell my hair again, this time to a different buyer, who is anonymous. The transaction goes fine, nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't ask the buyer any questions this time because lesson learned. Then 2 months later, I get this message, which I dug out of my email just now. Quote, I apologize in advance. I know this is a strange question, but do you have any old hairbrushes with hair or excess hair from over time you're willing to sell? If so, please message me. I'll absolutely be willing to buy it. The moral of the story, people who buy hair on eBay are absolute weirdos. Then again, I plan to cut my hair this month and put it on eBay once more. So who's the real weirdo here? I'll update you if anything goes awry on this next sale. A few months ago, my girlfriend and I were on the drive back home from a late night concert at about 1 a.m. We were basically in the middle of nowhere, and I decided to pull off at a random rest stop to use the bathroom. I figured at this time the only people at this place would just be truckers and other people in the same situation as us. I got out of my car and walked up to the building, and as soon as I stepped inside, there were a few weird things that I noticed. So this place was laid out with 2 men's rooms and 2 women's rooms. There were also 2 vending machines, one in both corners on either side of the restroom doors. When I walked in, there were 2 people, both of them standing directly in front of each vending machine, both just staring at the machines, not reaching to get money or actually looking like they were intending on buying anything. So I walked past these people and went into the first men's room. I walked inside and I was the only person in this room. So I made use of the urinals, which were laid out in a U shape. A few seconds later, somebody else walks in. An older guy, maybe 50 or 60, working class looking, and he walked over and started using the urinal right behind me, just a few feet away. Nothing about this was alarming at first, but being the careful person that I am, I already have my pocket knife open in my hand in my front hoodie pocket. Once I finish up, I go wash my hands and walk out the door to the first restroom. As I walk out, I realize that I also had to take a shit. So to avoid being awkward, I walked into the second men's room, taking note that these weird vending machine people were in the exact same spots. I go into the first stall and try to go about my business when I hear someone else walk into the restroom and go into the stall right beside me. Keep in mind, there were about 6 other open stalls away from mine, so I found this very weird. I looked down and immediately recognized the work boots as the guy from the first bathroom. This guy just walked in and I wasn't even in there for 2 minutes. I immediately got up and left that bathroom, started speed walking out of the building, and I noticed from outside, looking back inside, that he had also quickly gotten up and was heading towards the outside doors. I hopped in my car, waking up my girlfriend, and I told her that I would explain in a minute. I put my car into reverse and whipped out of the spot. As I was shifting into drive, I looked up and saw this guy a few feet away, standing next to his old beat-down truck, literally just staring me down. As I started to drive away, I stared directly back at him and saw him make this really creepy, mime-like surprised look at me. I was tired and confused, but I still don't know what this guy was planning at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere at 1 in the morning, or if the vending machine people had anything to do with it at all. But this is one of the only times I've ever experienced something like this and have felt in actual danger. If anyone has any similar experiences or ideas of what this may have been, I'd love to hear them. One afternoon, I was on my way home from Arby's with a mint chocolate shake. Zoned out for a sec and almost didn't notice his car. I tried just letting him through, but he insisted that I go on ahead. Didn't think much of it. Just continued my walk. He drove ahead of me and parked his car near some apartments. He had on a black polo, so I assumed he was just dropping something off for a job or something like that. As I kept walking, he approached me and offered me a $20 bill. I was confused, so I asked why, but couldn't understand what he said in response. I refused the bill since I know what's best for me. I tried to keep walking, but that didn't deter him. He grabbed me by my waist, and I stepped to the side. He began pulling me towards his car. As he tried to place his hand over my face, I bit his hand so he wouldn't silence me, and I made sure to scream as loud as possible to try and attract any bystanders I could. He managed to get me into his car, but just before he closed the door, I stuck my foot through it to keep it open. I then threw myself out onto the pavement and made myself go limp, since adding any dead weight without warning creates a sudden resistance and makes it harder for them to grasp you. Due to this quick thinking, and I believe this quick thinking alone, I was able to get away unharmed. Once I was dead weight on the pavement, he realized that he wouldn't be able to lift and throw me back into the car. At that moment, he dashed back around to the driver's side of the car, as I quickly booked it and got on the phone with my mom once I was at a safe distance. I made sure to stay on the line with her until I got back to our house. After that, I'd taken some time to calm down as I waited for the cops to get to my home so I could make a statement. The officer ended up praising my quick thinking, telling me that I'd luckily done everything right in this situation. Please guys, take self-defense seriously. I've only ever had a week-long course, and just that alone had managed to save my life. I don't remember too much from my self-defense course, and only used basic techniques that I had remembered, which was making noise, dropping my weight, and checking behind me. Any other actions I'd taken were a result of logic and quick thinking. Chances are, if I'd gotten more self-defense training, it likely wouldn't have been even as close of a call as it was. Also, while I'm sure this goes without saying, I'm going to say it anyway. If at any time anybody approaches you waving a $20 bill in your face, without a legitimate reason, I think it best if you turn around and head the other direction. While I take the outcome of this very seriously, and I grasp just how lucky I am that this worked out the way that it did, I can't shake the feeling of not knowing what would have happened had he got me all the way in that car. And furthermore, I'm still pissed that I dropped my mint chocolate shake. Alright everybody, buckle in. This is going to be a long one about my creepy uncle who used all kinds of weird technology to spy on anyone he could, including my family and I. So my family of 5 happily welcomed my uncle, who is my mom's brother, into our home as a roommate, a little over 10 years ago, maybe a bit longer. We'll call him David for the purpose of this post. David, who was in his mid-40s at the time, was at first kind, hardworking, and to himself for most of the years he spent in our home. He's always been really interested in technology and spyware. If it had a camera or could listen and record, he was definitely interested in it. He was pretty private about his room and computers, and we never invaded his personal space because he never gave us a reason to. As time passed though, I'd say around year 6, we noticed his behavior got a little more introverted and private. He was extremely depressed and paranoid, but refused to address these issues, so we left him alone for the most part. As far as I know, at this point he was deeply involved with chat rooms and external listening devices. He started drinking pretty heavily, and would sometimes steal my mother's prescription pills to catch a high. Again, these things were pretty touch and go, and no one in the household really knew how to address his worsening behavior. My dad would occasionally question him and his actions. We didn't allow alcohol in the house because my dad used to struggle with substance abuse himself and has been living sober for quite some time now. Anyway, we gave him an ultimatum: stop drinking or leave. This worked for some time, but he would just hide from us when he drank, lock himself in his basement room for hours, sometimes even days. We knew he was drinking though, because at random hours of the day, you could hear anger-fueled screams come from his room, or loud techno music that would thump until midnight. The last 2 years specifically have been really hostile and strange between him and our family. Anytime he would return home, he'd be highly intoxicated and ready for bed. None of us would interfere because it wasn't uncommon to get into an argument with him about his odd behavior and heavy drinking. He became pretty hostile towards myself and my father at that point. He would purchase a lot of strange devices designed for listening or watching, which made us all intensely uneasy and on edge. My father told me once that he came home with these new sunglasses and excitedly told my dad that they're really great for watching people and that he'd spent the whole day at the park lurking on strangers. I don't believe he had any malicious intent towards anyone, but his fascination with spying was honestly unnerving and a huge red flag. We demanded that he leave and seek residence elsewhere. We gave him a deadline and even offered to help him find a new place. He ignored us for weeks and pretty much refused to leave our home. My mother didn't know how to handle the situation, especially because it was her brother. She feels like we've betrayed family or forsaken him. Anyway, it wasn't uncommon to find small, strange devices around the house that were absolutely unexplainable if you've never seen them before. Things like movement tracking devices, infrared cameras, or mics that would record any audio that occurred in the room that it was placed in. He also had control of our Wi-Fi, and I'm positive he had access to our browser search histories or other Wi-Fi related information in general. If we confronted him about his behavior or asked him to pack up and leave, he would threaten us. "I see everything you do. I heard what you said the other night." Although never knowing what kind of information he was trying to blackmail us with, we were all very uncomfortable with the idea of our privacy being breached. Not having anything to hide, though, his threats were pretty hollow and ineffective. My dad wanted to test David and see if he was using devices at our home while he was away from the house. My dad would wait for David to leave in the morning and go to work. My dad would then shut off the Wi-Fi, sometimes even the power breaker, to see if he would react while away from the house. Sure enough, David would return to our house immediately and question him. "Why is the Wi-Fi off? What happened to the power?" My dad would ask him how he knew the Wi-Fi had been off while he was away. Strange behavior, needless to say. Each time my dad did this, he would return to the house immediately to recover the Wi-Fi and all of his devices. If he was home and the Wi-Fi went down, this man would have the ultimate tantrum. Everyone would undergo a serious interrogation and be bombarded with accusations involving the Wi-Fi not working. He began threatening my dad specifically and would show him this weird spyware that he purchased. David would place the device against the wall, and he could hear anyone speaking throughout the home. So much as faint whispers could be heard from the device. David wanted us to know that he could hear everything we were doing. It was his scare tactic, in order for him to remain in the house with us. When he continued to refuse to leave our home, after being given a proper eviction notice, we had to seek assistance from the police and the courts to have him legally removed from our home. We also changed all the locks in our home to prevent any unwelcome visits from David. He's been out of our home for nearly 6 months now, yet we still experience strange things that have us all on the edge of our seats. Strange, faint beeps from different areas of the house, unknown Bluetooth devices that are supposedly 10 meters or less away, and wires that run all around the house. I think we're all just paranoid from his consistent spying over the years, but sometimes I still come across unidentifiable objects around the house. Most of them look inactive and not in use, but I end up smashing them regardless. David tried to insist we keep his Wi-Fi in service after he left, but we had no interest in using his Wi-Fi and immediately removed his router from our home. I discovered that David had climbed through one of our backyard basement windows into the house at some point. I only noticed someone had been in the backyard because of fresh snow, which revealed enormous boat-like footprints. The night that the snow fell, no one had been home for hours. My brother had moved out nearly 2 months before. My mother returned home from work at 3 a.m. My dad returned home around midnight. My sister had been staying at a friend's house for the weekend, and I got home from work at around 7 a.m. I go into the backyard every day to throw the ball for my dog, and when I came across the prints, I immediately felt scared, because no one currently in my house wears such humongous shoes. And after questioning everyone in the home, they all assured me they had not been in the backyard as of last night. It was obvious that someone, most likely David, had entered our home through the backyard. What for? Well, we still don't know that. We haven't found any changes in our home since his unwelcome entry. We have filed a restraining order against him for safety measures, but to no avail, as he's still spamming my mother with cryptic texts and threats over the phone. We're thankful that David is no longer in our house, but somehow, he's still traumatizing us with his all-seeing eyes. I used to be a process server, and I have a lot of interesting stories from that job. I have a couple that really scare me, even to this day. This is one of those stories that got me, and this experience helped me confirm that I should always trust my gut. I went to an apartment building to serve someone who lived there. When I was walking up to the building, there was an older man sitting on a bench right by the front door. He had a cane next to him. He was friendly and said hello. I said my hello back. With my guard initially being down, I began to have a small chat with him. I attempted to open the front door, but it ended up being locked. I explained to the man that I'm process serving, so I was attempting to give some papers to someone that lives in the building. He started to go on about how he has a daughter my age and that he wouldn't be comfortable with her being a process server because it's not a safe job. He also said it must be extra unsafe for me because I'm so small. I'm about 5'2", and at the time weighed about 110 pounds. I instantly started to feel like something was off. I also thought that maybe I was being overdramatic, because this is just an older man who obviously has to use a cane to get around. I felt like it was almost rude to be cautious of someone like that. I still had a job to do, and I wasn't going to let this deter me from that. So I asked the man if he was willing to let me into the apartment building. He said he would. It seemed to take him some effort to stand up and walk towards the door with his cane, so I started to feel like I had been overreacting by a little bit. The man opened the door for me, and I walked into the building. I was about to go up the stairs, but the man insisted I take the elevator. I started to feel very uneasy, but for some reason I agreed to take the elevator anyway. I thought the man would leave me alone if I took his suggestion. I started to walk over to the elevator, and he followed. He continued to talk to me, asked me about my job and life. I was trying to be as vague as possible. When I got onto the elevator, the man also got onto the elevator. At this point, I froze because I didn't understand why he had followed me this way. The man was standing closer to the back wall of the elevator, and I was standing nearer to the door. I didn't want to make eye contact with him in that enclosed space, while alone, but I was watching him in the reflection of the shiny metal door. I asked him why he got on the elevator with me. He said that he was, quote, watching out for me. When the man said this, I could clearly see that his head was facing me, and it moved down starting at the floor where my feet were, and it moved up slowly like he was looking at my body from bottom to top. I started to feel claustrophobic, and that I needed to get off the elevator right then. The elevator door opened and I practically jumped out. I told the man that he needed to stay there because I wanted to respect the privacy of the person I was serving papers to. I then wished the man a nice day, because I felt like that was what I needed to say at the time to end the conversation, without him trying to pick it back up. The man simply nodded at me. I got off the elevator and began walking down the hallway, looking for the apartment number that's listed on the documents in my hands. I continue walking when I feel the sensation like I'm being watched, but I don't turn around. If I'm being honest, I'm too afraid that I'll see the man standing there. I ended up having to walk around the corner and further down the hallway. The feeling of being watched goes away. I know it's because now there's a wall between me and whoever's eyes I could feel were watching my back. I get to the right apartment and knock on the door. No answer. I knock again, but this time much louder. After waiting about 30 seconds, I give the door 4 sturdy knocks before patiently waiting. I couldn't hear anyone inside the apartment. No TV, no pets, no microwave running. Just nothing. I fully believe the person isn't home. I accept defeat. I'm a little annoyed that I went through all of this just to arrive at this person's apartment and find that they're not even home. I start to walk back the way I came from. When I turn around the corner of the hallway, what comes into view makes my stomach sink. The man is still standing there. One hand on his cane, one hand hovering in front of the elevator button. I keep walking while a bunch of different thoughts are running through my mind. When I start to approach the elevator, the man asks, "How'd it go?" I answered simply, "They weren't home." The man says, "I've been waiting for you here." There was something about how the man said this. I knew that I shouldn't get on the elevator with him again. I basically did a drive-by and started a fast walk past him. I told him that I was in a hurry and that I had to take the stairs. I didn't wait for him to reply, and I continued to move quickly past the elevator and towards the staircase. Once I reached the stairs, I'm not sure why, but I started running down them. Once I got down one case of stairs, I heard a loud, "Wait!" I looked back once, and I could see the man up on top of the staircase, carrying his cane, as he began to run down the stairs after me. He wasn't using his cane at all to descend down the stairs, and he was moving way faster than he had previously. I turned away and ran as fast as I could down the stairs without falling. I started to jump down 2 stairs at a time. I knew that he was close behind me because I could hear his loud feet as he was running down behind me. I reached the bottom of the stairs and almost ran into another resident of the building. I apologized quickly and then felt panic when I realized the man was probably right behind me. I looked behind me once more, and he was now using his cane again to get down the last few steps. I looked back at the other building resident, and they had a puzzled look on their face. I mumbled, "Have a great day," and booked it out of the apartment straight to my car. I didn't check to see if the man was following me, but something in my gut told me that other resident being present had helped me. When I reached my car, I practically jumped into it, slammed the car door, and hit lock right away. I started my car and pulled out of the lot quickly. The parking lot required me to drive past the front door of the apartment building. I looked over to see if there was any sign of that man, and there he was. He had stepped outside the front door and was just standing there, leaning on his cane and smiling at me as I drove by. He then gave me a slow wave. I don't know why, but I gave a tight-lipped smile. I still felt like I had to be nice even though something obviously really messed up had just happened. But at least I was locked in my car, driving away, and he had zero way of catching up to me this time. My mother was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base, which is in Japan, around the late 2010s. Being a military child at the age of 12, my life had reset once again. I didn't have friends once more, and I had to learn an entire new neighborhood on my own. Didn't really have anything that made me ecstatic about life. That is, except the Pokemon League held on base. It was run by a few people who earned their judge cards from Nintendo and held tournaments and just open game nights. It was really fun picking up the card game, playing in the video game. They even had a small gym and an Elite Four system. I made a lot of friends, and one of them was one of the judges, who I'm thankful for to this day, because if it weren't for him, I may not be here now. The judge in question, who we'll call Professor Getsu for the sake of anonymity, was a very nice dude. He was the youngest of 3 officials and wore a white professor's getup. He looked maybe on the edge of his teens, early 20s, with dark hair and glasses, with a skinny frame. He was extremely helpful to newcomers, sort of like the big brother we could all look up to and strive to be, even if his game name of Getsu was a bit nerdy for me. He was always one of the last people to leave, helping to clean up, and he supposedly lived nearby. The last thing is important for what's about to happen. It was a bit of a colder evening when the event ended. I was sitting outside in the parking lot, scrolling through memes my friends texted me as I waited for my parents to pick me up. I was just kind of zoning out as the time clicked by when I heard someone nearby. Hey girly, you play Pokemon?" I would look up and see this tall man, kinda chubby looking, ambling my way. I saw this man every now and then in the events, and he didn't really ever stand out that much. I give a small nod, said, "Yeah, I do," as he gives this wide smile, like creepy wide. He starts walking forward, and I'm hit with this nasty stench, like overwhelming bad body odor. I blink a bit as I see he's walking from a black sedan that happens to have its back door open. "I got this cool card collection. Come here, let me show you." Now, my parents have always taught me stranger danger, but my kid brain thought, hey, he went to events and I've seen him, so it should be fine. At least that's what I thought, until he grabbed me by my wrist and began to drag me towards the sedan. To say that I immediately started screaming is an understatement. I think I started screaming before he even touched me. Stinky didn't care though. He was yanking me at this point, saying how I'll have fun and throwing out things about trading cards, like someone listening would think that he was just dealing with a whiny kid. I honestly thought that I was going to be taken, and I'd never see my mom or dad again, that I'd be on the back of a milk carton, and soon forgotten about thereafter. Thankfully, Professor Getsu had walked out at that very moment, presumably on his own way home. All I know is I hear the sound of fabric hitting this big dude's face, as the professor had thrown his white coat over the man's head. I feel Professor's hand go to where this dude is grabbing my arm, and then I see his hand grab Stinky's pinky finger and yank back, hard. Stinky let go right away and yowled like an animal as Professor pushed me back behind him as he yanked his coat off the dude. He then kicked at the back of the guy's knees as he caused him to buckle, as Professor grabbed his wrist and pulled back on them. Stinky groaned in even more pain as Professor looked at him with just a cold look in his eye. The big brother figure was gone, something else in its place. I think I was a bit scared of it. Professor's tone of voice when he spoke didn't help either. Like icy daggers lingered with his words against Stinky. If I see you back here, or doing this shit to my charges, this will pale in comparison to what Japanese prisons will do to you. Stinky would ultimately scramble away, get into his car, and peel out of the parking lot, Professor glaring at him till he was out of sight. He would then guide me inside of the venue, buy me some fish and chips, and sit down with me until my parents arrived. That cold persona he had when he kicked that dude was gone, back to being the big brother that I knew. To be frank, that in and of itself frightened me. I couldn't understand how or why the young man got so aggro. I only later learned that Professor Getsu was a black belt who taught kids how to defend themselves with his mother at the local activity center. I suspect he had something of a protective persona, or something in his own life led him to act in such a way. He explained the situation to my folks when they arrived. I wasn't allowed to go to events and leagues as much as I used to, but still was able to from time to time. Professor Getsu was still his normal self at the events, but he would stop coming to the events a year afterwards, his license having expired, and his father moving out of the country soon after. Reaching about the same age as he was, and with a little sibling of my own, I sympathized with how, for a brief moment, he became something terrifying just to make sure that I was safe. Oh, and as for Stinky, he was either banned entirely from events, or simply terrified of Professor Getsu, because he never showed his face again. I wish the professor a good life, and I hope he's doing well. I know in my heart that he's protecting others, as well as teaching them to protect themselves. Good on him, and thank you one more time, Professor. This story happened last year, around spring, while I was broke and struggling to make ends meet. I had just moved out and didn't want to resort to going back to my parents, so I was desperate. I was constantly scouring Craigslist for caregiver and housekeeping type gigs just to make quick cash while I looked for a full-time position. After responding to several, I got a bite back from a man who had advertised as a disabled man who needed help with his morning and evening routines since he had a bad back. As a past caregiver, I thought nothing of his request to help with bathing and dressing, since I knew it could be difficult for some. After chatting on the phone and coming to the conclusion that he was a nice, normal person, I proceeded to head over to his townhouse late one night to help him with his nighttime routine. He lived a bit out of the way for me, but I was desperate, and I didn't mind. He even said I could spend the night since he'd need me in the morning anyway. Once I got there, he was a decent-looking man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, but he did walk with a cane. He paid me $200 up front for the expected nighttime and morning routine that next day. He explained that he was ex-military and had back surgery recently. Things started to get weird once he offered me some wine and commented on how cute he thought I was. I should have seen this as a big red flag, but again, I was super poor and let this cloud my judgment as I gave him every benefit of the doubt. He then led me to his bedroom where he got undressed for his evening shower. I was horrified since I saw that he already had a giant erection and wanted me to lather him up. He asked if I wanted to take my clothes off, and I rightfully declined. He responded respectfully. However, he did touch my butt when I bent over to pick something up for him. I know I should have ran out right then, but I was waiting for the right moment, whatever that means. After quickly giving him the most unsexy shower in the most platonic way I could, he got out and said he was heading to bed, but didn't want to wear any clothes. The guest room where I was to stay was right next to his, and though I was tired, I was still pretty on edge. My gut instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there. The issue was that we were in a 3-story townhouse, and we were on the top floor. He had also installed baby gates on each floor so his cat wouldn't run away. I knew my escape route would be littered with obstacles. He had also turned off all the lights on the lower floors, so it was pitch black. In order for me to get out, I'd have to pass his room as well. I quietly arranged my stuff in my purse while I heard his TV blaring. To my horror, I saw him swiftly walk to his bathroom without his cane. I realized then that he was not as disabled as he had previously let on, since he had put on an act as if he couldn't walk without it. He also still had his heart on and was holding a giant bottle of lotion with him. As quickly and as quietly as I could, I fled and ran like hell out of the room while he was in the bathroom, and jumped like an Olympic sprinter over the cat's gates, down the dark stairs. As I threw the front door open to run to my car, I heard his house alarm go off. I got into my car as fast as lightning, heart beating like crazy. I immediately began getting phone calls from his number, and every car that trailed me had me terrified until I got out of there. Finally, after a 2-hour drive, I was back to my place and grateful that I was able to escape. Who knows what could have happened if I had stayed overnight, but I'm oh so glad to not have to find out. When I was about 7 years old, my mom and father decided to get a divorce. This event prompted her to move and follow her career in a different small town, which would pay better, as she was a single parent now. On our long 12-hour drive to the new location, we stopped on the way in this little town which was very hippie, sort of had lots of art, little shops. You know the vibe. My mom said we were here to meet up with a friend of hers, Paulette. I guess they went way back in her college days and recently got in touch after a decade. We ended up going to this East Indian restaurant where we could meet her for dinner. This slender, somewhat fragile woman walks in. She was very tall, well over 6 feet. Big, frizzy, curly brown hair with blonde streaks in it. She was Caucasian, wearing a colorful shawl with feather earrings. Very pale blue eyes on her as well. She looked like a mosaic tapestry or something. She walks over to the table and gives my mom a greeting and a big hug, makes her way over to my older brother and shakes his hand, afterwards coming around to my side of the table. I lend my hand out to her and she just stood there expressionless, with her mouth partly open with a blank gaze, simply staring at me. It briefly made me uncomfortable, and then a flick of a switch. This spark ignites in her face. She makes this huge Cheshire cat smile, kneels over, and hugs me tightly. She goes back to sit with my mom, and they catch up over the years while we eat dinner. My mom gets the bill and says to her in the parking lot, "Oh, you can just follow us." We get in the car, and my mom explains to us that Paulette is actually coming over to live with us for a while. She followed us for the next several hours. We get to the new place and unpack our necessity items, as we had a moving truck hired with the rest of our stuff arriving in the morning. There was a bunk bed already set up at this place for me and my brother. It was fairly late into the night, roughly 11 p.m. when we landed. Me and my brother set up our sleeping bags. I take the top bunk. My mom says goodnight, and I fell asleep pretty quickly. I do wake up around 1:30 a.m. though. I guess the patio deck light got turned on, which was right outside of our room. I gazed out through the blinds and I see the back of Paulette's curly hair. She was sitting on the deck cross-legged, smoking a cigarette. I didn't think much of it and laid back down until I noticed the light from the window gets partially blocked out. I look behind me with my head still on the pillow, and I see the unmistakable outline of Paulette's shadow facing our window. While she was there for minutes, I didn't want to lean up. I just pretended to sleep. Her shadow moves and I hear the front door close. The patio light turns off after a few moments. I reposition myself facing the wall to go back to sleep. As I begin to drift off, the door to our room opens slowly. I quickly turn my head around to see that it wasn't my mom who had entered the room. It's Paulette wearing a nightgown. I turn back facing the wall and close my eyes once more. She quietly makes her way to my bunk. I feel her fingers in a claw formation start to comb the back of my hair, running her nails on the back of my scalp as she goes. I kept my eyes closed tightly, nearly holding my breath, trying to give no signs that I was awake. I smell some essential oils like lavender, and she begins rubbing oil into the back of my neck, pinching my neck muscles sometimes, holding it, and then releasing. I begin to kind of just accept whatever it is that's happening, because it didn't feel all that bad after a while. I actually ended up falling asleep to it after my initial confusion. I wake up in the morning, my mom is off at work, and Paulette is waiting at the table with cereal for me and my brother. She put chocolate chips in my bowl, but not my brother's. My brother and I make small talk with her. She was very giggly, seemed to be trying to make us comfortable with the new situation. My brother heads back to his room to get his GameCube set up after he finishes his cereal. I was a slower eater than my older brother, so I was always last at the table. As I slowly ate, she was sitting there watching my every move. Once I finished, I said, "Thank you," and grabbed my bowl to bring it to the sink. She places her hand on mine and says, "I gave you a neck massage so you wouldn't pee your bed. I know lots of young ones pee beds when they sleep in unfamiliar surroundings." I looked up at her and said, "I've never peed my bed before, but thank you." She continued to massage the back of my neck for the next few nights. I ended up telling her, "I'm comfortable here now. You don't need to do this anymore." She reacted to that with a sigh, but acknowledged it. I started elementary school the following week, which meant getting earlier night sleeps, around 8 p.m. Her and my mom would stay up much later than me and my brother, and drink their wine. I always waited for them to go to bed before I used the washroom at night to go pee, because my mom would kind of scold me for being up late on weeknights. Once things got quiet around 11, I'd sneak out and tippy-toe to go use the bathroom. This was my ritual for the next few weeks, until Paulette started doing the exact same thing at the same time, every time. Every night when I needed to use the bathroom, it just so happened Paulette needed it too, and she would blaze down the hallway across from my room when I'd open the door. I'd just go back in my room and wait for her, although it began happening so frequently that I would just go outside to pee, right outside of our backyard door. This started to piss me off, no pun intended. I'd open my door as quietly as I could and then sprint to the bathroom. This seemed effective for a while. One night I get up slightly later than usual, around midnight. I was a little more careless with noise because I was half asleep and groggy. I open the door and Paulette's door just slams open instantly. She barges out in the dimly moonlit hallway, completely naked, and just starts quickly walking down the hallway. I was already so far down the hall, I couldn't turn back to my room then. I jumped behind my mom's jade plant and squished my knees to my chest as I tucked my head down, trying to hide myself. She whizzes straight by me so fast I felt wind push my hair. She stays in the bathroom for almost an hour straight with the door open just a crack. Lights off, in silence. I stayed there beside the washroom door, tucked in the corner behind the plant pot, not making a sound. I hear the bathroom door open completely and she starts pacing up and down the hallway. I kept small and insignificant behind the plant until she goes back into her room. I brushed this off as a complete accident. It was just unfortunate timing. But no, every night going forward, she would literally sprint down the hallway naked if I'd make a single noise. A creak in the floorboard, open my door, whatever. About 2 months into this, me and my brother were sword fighting with tree branches outside. He ends up clipping my forehead, causing it to bleed pretty badly. Paulette sees this happen. She walks up to my brother, what I thought would be to scold him. But no, she stomp kicks him in the head with her boot, causing him to fall onto his back. He gets up off the ground crying and runs into the house. She grabs me and starts cradling me, rocking back and forth as she does, shaking so much that she was vibrating, repeatedly asking if I'm hurt in a shaky voice. My mom finds out through my brother what happened and decides then that Paulette needs to leave. Her final day there, she made a point to see me one-on-one in the driveway before entering her car. She knelt down and said, "I hope I can see you in a different life. You remind me so much of my husband. Goodbye," as she starts bawling her eyes out while hugging me. I asked my mom who her husband was. I guess he was a Marine that died in Afghanistan a few months prior to her moving in with us. Mom said she would frequently say how much I reminded her of him on a daily basis. My mom hasn't spoken to her since. I've never told my mother about the massages or anything to this day, as she was already exiled and I felt it would just cause more drama than it would solve. Even back then as a child, I was so relieved that Paulette was gone. She gave me the creeps, and that says something when it's happening to a child. Can't even verbalize what the creeps really are. Okay, so bear with me. This happened when I was a kid, and I double-checked the story with all of my family members. So this was in the mid-'80s. I was about 7, maybe 8 at the time, at home with 2 of my older sisters, 8 and 11-ish, and 2 cousins, 7 and 8, all 5 of us girls. My sister, 11, was in charge of babysitting us 4 younger girls. You have to picture what our house looked like to understand what happened. It was a 2-story box house with a flat roof and a small box front porch, also with a flat roof. I can't remember what we were doing, but we were all in the house. We kept hearing noises coming from the roof, like walking, tapping, basically what sounded like rocks being dropped down the downspouts. You know, kids, we thought of a squirrel or something in that vein, but it just kept happening. Then my older sister said something about how maybe someone climbed the huge tree beside the house and got on the roof. We were all scared because we knew there was a roof access point in the bedroom that I shared with one of my sisters. What if they could get inside? My oldest sister told my other sister and one of our cousins to walk across the street to the corner store, across an empty gravel parking lot, and on the way back, look up to see if they could see someone on the roof. So the girls, both about 8 years old, walk halfway across the parking lot and, being curious kids, turned around, looked up, and saw a guy in one of those totally 80s crop top football jerseys. Think Johnny Depp in A Nightmare on Elm Street. He was crouched down on the roof, obviously trying to conceal himself. The girls came running home, freaking out, and told my older sister about the guy. My sister, freaking out as well, first went to the neighbor's house to use their deck to see if she could see on our roof, but couldn't see a thing. She came home and immediately called the police. It felt like it took them ages to show up. When they got there, I don't think they believed a word we said. They thought a bunch of little kids were making up this story for attention. One cop drove down the road, up a hill about a block away, to see if they could see anything. But the way the roof was, you couldn't see a person if they were laying down up there if you tried. Then these cops tell us kids that we had to go upstairs and check everywhere to see if we found anyone. 5 little girls from ages 7 to 11 sent upstairs, scared, crying, to look for this man, knowing about the roof access. We all cried not wanting to go, but they said we had to. To this day, I remember just how scared I was. I remember looking, but how well do little kids look, right? The cops didn't listen to us, didn't check out the house, inside or out, and ultimately left. We were scared to be left home alone, knowing that there was a guy out there. Who knew where? We didn't know if he was laying down on the roof, or had jumped down, or somehow gotten in and was now hiding. My mom finally got home a few hours later, and we told her what happened. My mom explained to us that there was a lock on the roof access, and that no one could get in, but she checked anyway. Then went to check out the outside. There were clear footprints in the dirt, dug in good and well from him jumping off the roof, onto the porch, and off into the flower bed. Oh, my mom was steaming mad when she realized we told the truth and weren't believed by the police. We went to the station the next day and were all separated and interviewed. We all told the same story. My mom went up and down the sides of cops, verbally berating each and every one for not believing her children. We never found out who the guy was or why he was there. But I wonder to this day, as a woman in my 40s, did he know it was a house with 5 little girls home alone? This happened a few months ago. I'm a 23-year-old male, and I was driving home from a trip to the store while talking to my friend on the phone. It was around 9 or 10 p.m. I pull up into my driveway, park, and talk to my friend for a few minutes longer while I'm sitting in the car. All of a sudden, this sketchy car pulls up directly behind me. There's no way that I could back out without hitting the passenger side of it. It's dark, my driveway lights are kinda dim, and they deliberately turned off the lights of their car when they pulled up behind me. But I faintly spotted 3 men sitting in it. I'm feeling creeped out at this point, so I asked my friend what I should do. Together, we both decide that I should wait it out a bit and see if they leave. A few more minutes go by and they're still there. Eventually, we figured that the best plan of action would be to stay on the phone, calmly grab my bags from the trunk without breaking eye contact with the people in the car, and walk to the door, which is only about 15 feet away. In retrospect, it probably would have been a better idea to just call my parents and ask them to open the door for me from inside. I step out from my car, then grab my stuff from the trunk. The guy in the rear passenger seat of the car cracks the door open, and the guy in the front passenger seat is staring me down. They're definitely assessing if I'm a viable target. I kept my eye contact with them, but I felt like a deer in headlights. It felt like ages, but must have only been 2 to 3 seconds at the most. Suddenly, the guy in the rear shouts something to his buddies along the lines of, "Oh fuck, it's a guy." Shuts the door and they speed away at like 80 miles per hour on a residential street. I was relieved, but mostly confused. I updated my friend and let them know I'm alright before walking inside. I'm a guy, 5'10", slightly overweight with a bit of a baby face, so I don't exactly come across as intimidating to most people I meet. So I doubt that I scared them off because of my appearance alone. I'm terrified to think what could have happened to me if I were female. It's legitimately really messed up. Why am I safe from these things? Meanwhile, my sister and female friends have no choice but to keep guns in their cars, get tiny cans of pepper spray for their keychains, and avoid being alone in general. It's a scary place out there, whether you're a guy or girl, or anybody else. Always remain vigilant. I used to think my neighborhood was relatively safe, but now I'm afraid of sitting in my own driveway at night. This happened to me about 5 years ago while I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at the mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters one Saturday night in a very safe city with an ultra-low crime rate. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended up shopping pretty late. By the time we were wrapping up, most of the mall stores were beginning to close, and it was much less crowded than when we arrived. I took my girls to the connected Applebee's for a late dinner because we were all pretty famished. We finish up eating at about 10 p.m. and leave out the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys when a 50-ish-year-old crusty-looking guy starts walking up from somewhere in the parking lot with shaggy gray, white hair and a faded flannel shirt with old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and he said, "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold in an instant, and I stared at him owlishly and shakingly said, "What?" He then said that he was just kidding, came up and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car, waiting for me to unlock the car and to let them in. He then starts making small talk with me and my girls. He's asking things like if they were being good girls for Santa, how old they were, if we got all our Christmas shopping done, what kind of things did we get, etc. He didn't seem drunk, high, slow, or mentally challenged at all. He was very coherent and seemed of sound mind. Mind you, I was heavily pregnant, alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, who was being approached by a stranger who came and stood right next to my kids on the other side of the car just shooting the breeze, talking to me and my kids with his hands in his pockets and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant while trying to disguise my frantic hands digging inside my giant purse for my car keys. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes, while he periodically looked over his shoulder, left and right. I was silently panicking and trying to politely keep the situation from escalating, while also trying in vain to find my damn keys to get us out of there. They were in that purse hiding pretty damn well. I felt that at any moment he was going to pull a knife or a gun, rob me, and my kids were right next to him, away from their mother, on the other side of the car, which might as well have been a mile away, all while I couldn't find my fucking car keys to get my kids to safety. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see that my oldest daughter was a little weirded out, and she kept glancing at me to gauge my assessment and reaction to this situation. Kids often tend to not recognize potential danger when they're with their parents, since they see us as their protectors. And being that he was only talking and acting friendly, and I was doing my best to stay calm, they were oblivious to the alarming situation we were all in. And being 9 months pregnant, I was no match for this fully grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon on him. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried to give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "Well, it was nice chatting with you, but I gotta get these kids to bed," and "It was nice meeting you," and telling my girls to say that it was nice meeting him too. My polite attempts to get this guy to leave weren't working because he kept sidestepping my attempts and asking what their favorite school subjects are and how nice young ladies they were, while I was struggling with the shopping bags and digging through my giant purse. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to how not okay the situation was, because he was being, quote, friendly, and because of the whole "I'm with mommy so I'm safe" child mentality. So she started to talk about what she picked out for daddy for Christmas, and started enthusiastically talking about kid stuff, and asking him if he knew what Minecraft was, and keeping this creep from leaving us alone by keeping him engaged in conversation. They didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them the hell out of there. Then I suddenly felt this sinking feeling of dread when I realized that I may have lost my keys in the mall, and that we were stuck outside with this strange man who kept looking over his shoulder and was showing no signs of walking away. I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing it would make me do whatever he wanted as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline begin to spike, and my heart and stomach started doing flip-flops, and I felt like at any moment, something was about to go down, as the gravity of realizing that there were no other people or witnesses around totally set in. The odds were stacked against us, and he has his chance. All of a sudden he was like, "Okay, it was nice talking with you. See you later," and walked off in the same direction as to which he came. It was only then that I finally found my car keys. I was able to unlock the car and told my kids to get in fast. I locked the doors right behind us, started the car, and drove the hell out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and began to laugh. I was overwhelmed with relief, and then I was confused over what did just happen. I thought, why the hell would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it totally acceptable to go out of his way just to approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot late at night, just to chit-chat? But being that nothing bad happened, I brushed it off and joked about it too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked us how shopping went. I said it went well, and my 15-year-old told him what happened in the parking lot, how weird it was, and kind of joking about the situation. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm, and I started making fun of myself by telling my husband how I was attempting to inconspicuously rummage through my purse to find the keys. My husband went completely white, and I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm. I assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy was just talking, and eventually left on his own accord. Now, my father-in-law is a retired sheriff's deputy, and my husband went through police academy training after graduating high school. So being that the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop for a dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him the details. What my husband told me completely rattled me to the bone. He told me that he was 100% sure that the reason why that guy was hanging around us and chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock the car. The reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I got the door unlocked and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with the kids, hold a knife or a gun to them to gain leverage on me, to force me to cooperate knowing that I wouldn't abandon my kids, which would force me to get into the car with them and do whatever he wanted me to do, which most likely would be drive to a remote location and to do God knows what. Being that he wasn't wearing a mask suggests that his intentions were to also leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the backseat passenger door, where my 7-year-old was standing by waiting to get in. My husband then said that the most likely reason why the guy ended up leaving was because it took so long for me to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. And that whole time, I was desperate to find my car keys, which, through some sort of divine intervention, stayed hidden in my bag, thus saving us from potentially being abducted. 5 years removed, and this still chills me to my core. So much so that we don't go to the mall without my husband anymore. This happened close to 14 years ago when I was pregnant with my first child. My husband and I had gone to a friend's house one night for a bonfire and a hayride party. There were a lot of people there, and we knew quite a few, but some groups brought people that we didn't know. This was during a time when goth was big in some social circles. It was mostly people obsessed with bands like the Insane Clown Posse and heavy metal/screamo music. But there was another segment of this culture that was pretty heavily involved with the occult and Satan. That night, the group was split into groups of these types, and the majority gave off good vibes, except for one person in particular. When I walked into the house, he immediately focused on me. It was quite unsettling. He would stare, but in a very, very intense way. I don't know if I could explain it. It was rather unnerving. The hayride was taking off soon, so I told my husband that we should go find seats. We had slipped out of the house, and I knew this guy was still in there. I just wanted to get away from him. We loaded up on the wagon and got situated. Seconds before we took off, the guy suddenly jumps in the wagon and squeezes in a spot directly across from me. The entire ride, he stared, eyes boring into my soul. And honestly, this might sound super odd, but I had this overwhelming sense that he wanted to kill my baby or cause me great harm. I can't explain it. I just felt the overpowering sense of evil in him. I struggled with the feeling of how can I share this with someone else without sounding like I've completely lost my mind. So I didn't say anything to anyone. When we got back, I told my husband I didn't feel well and we should head out. With my large belly and all, he didn't question it, and we left. Fast forward a few years later, we visited a church of the same friend that held the party. And who should be there but that guy? Except, this time he had toned down his looks quite a bit, and his body language was more relaxed. I immediately sensed he was a different person than I had encountered years ago. My husband struck up a conversation with the guy for a while, but I decided to keep my distance. Afterwards, my husband told me how this guy had completely changed his life, how he'd once been deep into satanic stuff and see evil spirits. And then he shared the one thing that made the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. Do you remember seeing him at that bonfire years ago? You won't believe it. He said he was at the lowest point of his life at that time. He said he constantly heard voices telling him to kill people, and it was all he could do to not listen to them. This shook my entire sense of being, knowing that I had actually perceived what that man was feeling. I don't know how far things would have gone that night, but I'm glad to this day to not have tempted fate. Here's an added afterthought. That guy did pretty good for a while and lived in a family's home for a couple of years. They had a couple of boys and a daughter. Come to find out, he had been violently assaulting the daughter at night and ended up going to prison for a while. Last I saw him was about a year ago. I walked into a local hardware store and there he was greeting people. He was the store's manager. Still makes my skin crawl. Several years ago, I walked a handful of blocks up the street from my boyfriend's house to a convenience store to buy something to drink. It was pretty late, maybe 11 p.m., and I was trying to slide in there before the store closed. To set the scene, we lived in a transitory neighborhood that was chock full of abandoned houses and crime, with a few occupied residences and businesses scattered about. There were 0 streetlights or illumination on these streets past a certain point. Envision a more compact version of the type of Detroit neighborhood exemplified in the movie Barbarian, and you won't be far off the mark. Looking back, the nighttime excursions to the store, from my place to his, were absolutely idiotic on my part, but after living in that environment for years, you just become accustomed to it. Anyway, it was one of my many foolhardy nighttime store trips. My boyfriend, by then, would ask me not to do it, but I'd just ignore that. I wanted my drink after all. I got the few blocks up the street in the usual darkness, got my drink, and left the store to head back. Once outside, a guy was standing near the trash can hassling everyone who came out, asking for money, cigarettes, etc. I told him I didn't have anything, and started across the parking lot and head back, but this guy sprang after me like a freaking rabbit and grabbed a hold of my arm. He starts aggressively demanding that I go to a party with him, while trying to steer me down the pitch-black side street just beside the convenience store. He was probably about 6'7", crazy tall and super thin, with dreads all in his face, making it hard to even see what he looked like. His fingers bit into my arm and felt like they'd pinched a nerve. My heart starts pounding like crazy right away. I was used to brushing off this type of behavior, having lived in the neighborhood for several years by then, but this was way more aggressive than anything I'd faced so far. I shook my arm out of his grasp, told him I was heading to my boyfriend's place and it was only a few blocks down the street. He was waiting for me. Said sorry in an attempt to placate him and took off speed walking down the street. He called after me several times, and then I heard his quick steps as he decided to follow me down the road. By then I could feel my heartbeat in my eyeballs. My mouth had gone bone dry, and I was almost hyperventilating with fear, trying to stay quiet so this asshole wouldn't hear me. I had this feeling that to show fear or to look back at him would cause him to react violently, immediately. So I just put on a burst of speed and tried to outwalk him. However, my 5'5" legs were no match for his crazy long stride, and I could hear little pieces of rock and concrete crunching under his feet as he closed in on me. I literally felt like my heart would leap out of my chest or explode from fear. I tried to walk even faster, but I could hear the guy right behind me. I could hear his breath in my ear and got this overwhelming feeling that he was going to grab me at any second, maybe with a weapon, and try to force me to walk wherever he wanted me to. The neighborhood is pitch black, and there's no real through traffic, not at night. If he wanted to force me to go with him, I'd be powerless, save for trying to run from him. But with his height advantage, I knew that move would be futile, and he'd catch me fast. Finally, I could see my boyfriend's driveway in the distance, and him standing at the end of it, waiting for me. He had had a terrible feeling and already worried constantly about me walking at night, so he'd come outside to wait for me. I saw that he had his crowbar in one hand, his usual defense weapon, kept near the front door, and then my nerve broke. I began sprinting towards him, and the tall dude behind me started to sprint as well. I reached the place where my boyfriend stood and squeaked out, "Help!" or something like that, dove behind him and cowered, waiting for the tall dude to pull a gun and shoot us both, or begin struggling with my boyfriend. It didn't happen. He gets right up in my boyfriend's face, standing way too close to him, and asks for a light. My boyfriend gives him one, holding the crowbar aloft in the other hand so that it was very visible. Then I grab a hold of him and yank him into the house, locking the door and absolutely losing it, sobbing, freaking out while trying to choke out what had happened. My boyfriend goes looking from the windows and sees him kind of standing around and then sauntering off into the darkness. He saw him here and there for months afterward, up at the store or walking up and down the street. Unsurprisingly, I'm sure, I never took another nighttime walk. I still sometimes have nightmares about this. As I think about this story, I just wonder where I should start. Let's set the background first. I grew up in a very rural area. My parents have a pretty big piece of land with a nice 2-story farmhouse in the middle of it. To the south of the house is a peach orchard. The west is where the driveway is. It goes through an alley of cottonwood and pecan trees, but the land is pretty open and was used for cattle farming. The east and north is dense woodland and shrubs, which reaches all the way to our neighbors, about 2 miles away. Back then, I was working at a carpenter's shop in town. I'd just gotten my driver's license, and so I was able to get there on my own. Although I'd say it was pretty far away, about an hour-and-a-half drive. We started fairly late in the day at about 10 a.m. The owner of the company was sort of a night owl and loved to sleep in. But because of that, we ended up having to stay until 9 p.m. That was no problem in the summer, but turned out to be a bit of an annoyance in the winter, as it got dark pretty early, and I hated driving in the dark because the lights on my car weren't the best anymore. I drove a 1987 Chevy pickup, which had obviously seen better days. I hadn't had much money back then, so this was all I could afford. So one day in late December, about 10 or 11 years ago, I left work much later than usual. I had made a pretty stupid mistake on a nightstand I was building for a customer and needed to fix it, as the customer was going to pick it up the next day. When I finally finished, it was nearly midnight. I cussed out my stupidity, closed the shop up tight, and went to my car. There are 2 routes I can take home. One is on the highway. The other one is through backcountry and dirt roads surrounded by thick brush and trees. I usually took the highway, as it was much faster and safer, especially in the dark. But this day, there had been an accident, and the highway was blocked by emergency services, so I ended up taking the long way home. As soon as I left the main road and made my way up the dirt trails, I got this feeling, you know the one, as if something bad is about to happen, almost like impending doom. The longer I drove on the road, the stronger the feeling got. until it felt like all of my body and soul was aching to desperately turn around, drive back all the way to the roadblock, and wait until it was once again opened. I tried to suppress the feeling as best as I could, and tried to convince myself that I've driven this route many times, and I know that it's safe, albeit a bit rough on the truck. When I was driving through an especially rugged piece of brush, only about 10 miles away from my parents' farm, I suddenly felt my front left tire pop. I did my best to keep the truck on the road and made it to a safe stop. I kept a spare tire in the bed and had changed tires quite a lot on my own, so I knew it would just be a minor inconvenience, and I would be rolling again in a matter of minutes. That's where I was wrong, though. I climbed up on the truck's bed only to find that my toolbox had been broken into, and all of my tools, including my spare tire, had been stolen. So there I was, still miles from the nearest settlement, in bear and wolf country, in the middle of the night with no cell phone, and no way to repair my truck. I always kept a sort of survival kit in my toolbox, with a blanket, small axe, a fire starter kit, and some MREs. But it had gotten stolen too. Thank God I still had my trusty hunter's knife that my sister gave me when she moved to Finland. So I made the second, but bigger mistake of this day. I decided to walk home. Even now, I don't know why I made this decision. All I had to do was wait in my truck until sunrise, as I knew a neighbor was driving down the road every day at about 8 a.m. He could have taken me to town and called my parents to get the truck, but some stupid fart in my brain said, "Nah, it, I'm walking home." So on I went. I locked the car, took my rucksack with my belongings with me, and began the trek. I couldn't have walked far when I got this eerie feeling like something or somebody is watching me. I turned around, but nothing was there. I picked up my pace to make it out of there. All of a sudden, I heard some rustling in the bushes to my left. I called out, asking if there's anybody there, but of course I got no answer. The feeling of being watched just got stronger and stronger, and the rustling got more frequent, when suddenly, the brush stopped, and I came to a small clearing. That's when he spoke to me for the first time. "Hey there, boy." He had a pretty weird pronunciation. The first part was spoken softly, almost gently, but the boy was like an explosion to my ears. He made a tiny pause in between, then spewing out, "Boy." He was big, I guess about 6'6". He wore a long trench coat, a hat, gray short hair, and lifeless eyes, almost like a dead fish. But what really scared me was his dog. He had a huge black shepherd-like dog, but it looked wild, almost like a wolf. I immediately froze from fear. I always heard this term, but could never imagine it being like this. I couldn't move. I just couldn't. I tried, trust me. God, did I try. "What you doing there, boy?" he asked me. "Don't you want to talk to me, boy?" I still couldn't move a finger, but my mouth slowly started to work again. I told him about the truck and how I was trying to walk home, but I don't think he was able to understand a word I was saying, as I was stuttering and slurring the words out of fear. He made a few steps towards me, his dog fixating on me like prey. He came so close that I could smell him, a very odd smell, a bit like old cigarettes, but there was something else I just couldn't point out. I still stood there, unable to move. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, almost like he wanted to remember the smell of fear radiating from me. He began to grin. Not a genuine, honest grin, but the one where the eyes aren't involved at all. They stayed as lifeless as they were. "Be careful out here, boy. There are a lot of dangerous things out here," he said, and vanished into the brush as sudden as he had appeared. I started to thaw up and was able to move my body once again. All of a sudden, my knees felt weak and wouldn't bear the weight of my body anymore. I collapsed to the ground and my whole body started to shake uncontrollably as I began to sob with relief. As soon as I regained control over my body, I began to run. I ran like I never had before and never have again. I ran all the way home, which still was quite a long way. I can't describe the feeling of relief coming over me when I saw the all-so-familiar porch lights coming up in the distance, and I reached the edge of the woodlands on our property. "Hey there, boy." My heart skipped a beat. I screamed from sheer terror, and I knew that this would be the end of my life if I froze again. So I didn't stop running. I ran and ran and ran, never even bothered to look back. Only when I reached the warm yellow circles of light cast by our porch lamps, I dared to look back. He stood there on the edge of the woods like he did in the clearing, his dog Wolf on a leash next to him. He grinned that creepy grin again. I fumbled out my keys as my parents locked the back door at 8 p.m., unlocked it and stumbled in. Only when I had locked the door once more I started to feel remotely safe. I went upstairs to my room and made sure that all the windows were locked on my way up. When I looked out my bedroom window, he was gone. I told my dad about this when we got the truck the next day. He said that this was likely Samuel, an old hermit who had a small cottage down there in the woods and had been living there for at least the last 30 years. But he's never seen him with his own eyes. So in retrospect, I don't think I was ever in grave danger. But nevertheless, creepy stranger of the woods, let's never meet again. Over the course of my life, I've had so many things happen where I just get a gut feeling, almost like a warning alarm going off. Sometimes I'll find out why, sometimes not. Many years ago, my husband and I attended this small local church in our small town. The town doctor and his wife attended and were a prominent part of the congregation. The doctor's brother also attended, and everyone else seemed to like him. On the way home one Sunday, I told my husband, "There's something wrong with that guy. I don't know what it is, but I know that he shouldn't be trusted." My husband didn't understand why I felt that way. He and pretty much everyone else at our church thought that the brother was a nice guy and an upstanding citizen, just like his doctor brother. Little did we know what we'd find out. Several months later, the brother was found at a carpool parking lot in a van, essaying a small child. It was uncovered there was a long line of abuse with several young kids that he had been entrusted with through a Big Brother type mentor program. And while this discovery was shaking and disturbing on its own, it's made even more deplorable to find out that there have since been more accusations of abuse made against this man within our small community. When watching the TV news one morning to see this story break, my husband turned to me and his mouth absolutely hit the floor. He couldn't believe that my gut instincts had been right all along. This may in fact explain why, in our long marriage, he's yet to question my gut ever again. When I was a child, I lived in Clinton, Tennessee. Both of my parents worked full-time, so I was often sent over to stay with my grandparents, who had a plot of land in the vicinity of Mossheim, near Greenville. Both Grandma and Grandpa had been in East Tennessee for their whole lives, and that area for a good many years. They had been established at their home for some decades before this story, and remained there for a good time after. Recently, I had reason to return to that area after spending a majority of my adult life in Minnesota. Being in and around the area, driving the same roads, made me reminiscent about my lazy summer days tucked away at my grandparents', learning to shoot on the same .22 with which Grandpa had taught Mom, feeding fish at a neighbor's stocked pond, or spotting deer and bear with binoculars from the back porch. When I relayed this to my mom, she in turn told me a story about a time I scared my grandpa half to death, then lied about hanging out with Bigfoot. At first, I had no idea what she was talking about. Then I remembered exactly what actually happened with startling clarity. New context given by the experience adulthood provides. And no, this isn't about Bigfoot. Before we start, some information about my grandparents' land. Their house was on a small hill surrounded by a grass lawn. The lawn gave way to a smallish hayfield, then the wood line. Those woods lasted for a good half-mile to either side of the home, and a good several miles to the back. I hated the hayfield because it was too pokey to play in, but I liked to hang out in a creek that ran behind it. To get there, I would walk to the edge of the property just inside the wood line to avoid the hay. While at my grandparents', the only rules were that I stay where I could see the house, so the house could see me. I was to take a whistle with me anywhere I went, although I never took the whistle, seeing it as a badge of my regrettably young age. And the best part of the creek was, it was out of sight of the house. There was only a single narrow stretch where it got deeper than my knees, and thus the only part where I could swim. Naturally, I spent much of my time in that water splashing around, skipping stones, and otherwise just being a kid. One day I was playing in the creek when I noticed someone. It was a man, a stranger on the bank watching me. He had long hair, a beard, and pale skin so dirty that it was stained. I couldn't tell his age and simply thought of him as old. I have no better guess now, as he clearly went through long years of hard living. He wore no shirt, no pants, only a wrap of dirty cloth around his waist that I thought of as a Moses dress, thanks to some illustrated Bible stories. Around his neck there were multiple necklaces made from knotted tatters of cloth, fiber, and string. In those knots were various pieces of detritus, mostly bones, but some flowers and bits of dark glass. When I first saw him there by the creek, I was terrified, frozen still. The man, however, was smiling. He gestured from his squat with an outstretched arm, fingers down in a kind of "don't stop for me" type of wave. I didn't react, startled and reeling. Then he splashed at me, still smiling. He did it once more. I splashed back, and soon we were playing. We both threw water at each other. He jumped into the creek and stomped around with me, laughing all the while. He threw rocks into the water, and so did I. I pushed him, he pushed me back. We carried on for some minutes until my grandma called for me. With her voice, a switch had turned off. The man stopped in his tracks, gaze fixed back towards the house. Then, as my grandma kept on hollering, he looked to me. He crept back to his side of the creek, barely disturbing the water as he moved, then slid into the brush, completely silent the whole way, holding my gaze. Once he was out of sight, I waited in the water until my grandma found me. She wanted to know if I was alone. I said no. She became very tense, asking who was with me, while also looking around. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. Seeing no one, she pulled me back to the house without any more words, gripped like iron the whole time. At the house, the real inquisition began. I didn't really have new words. The event and this reaction overwhelming my ability to explain. Such silence further irked my grandma, and I was swiftly placed in a corner, held without bail, awaiting patriarchal judgment. About an hour later, my grandpa came home from work. He was told about my churlishness and was ready to set into me again when I started talking. I told him about the man, hairy and old, dressed like Moses, about how he played and then disappeared. I remember they digested this for a few minutes before sending me to my room. I was happy to go, and happier still Grandpa did not yell like he usually did when I misbehaved. Later, I was brought out for dinner. I ate in the kitchen with Grandma, but Grandpa called me to the back porch. He was on the swinging bench, looking out over the hayfield, turned red by the setting sun. He had kicked off his boots and put them next to his shotgun. I knew that was odd for the gun to be out of the closet. Previously, we had used it to shoot bottles. Sometimes he would have me throw them into the air like they were clay pigeons. These escapades were accompanied with speeches about how the gun was dangerous and only for adults to use. He went through my story once more, his tone deadly serious. Eventually, he asked me how hairy the man was, really. I told him very, thinking that this was the right answer. He asked where. I told him everywhere, like a bear. He ruminated on this for a while, and I grew more nervous, worried I was in trouble, or causing trouble, just wanting the trouble, wherever it lie, to end. So when he finally asked me to swear in the name of Christ and on my mother that I was telling the truth about everything, I said that I had been joking. He finally yelled and then sent me back to my room once more. From that point on, the family memory became that I had hid by the creek and made up a tale about Bigfoot. Although, I know for a fact that there was no Bigfoot involved. Just a very dirty stranger in tattered cloth that my child brain and vocabulary couldn't have explained if I had tried. I didn't want to tempt fate and potentially get into the trouble that I had feared was coming my way. And that's why I gave in and said that I had been telling stories in the first place. But even today, it still makes me wonder who it was that I came into contact with that summer day, what they were doing out there, and if they're still out there now. I live in Finland, in a fairly small city, and this happened to me a year ago, when I had just turned 14. It was Friday evening, and on every Friday, our mom lets us go to the store and buy candy. So me and my 12-year-old sister left our house to go to the store, while it was already dark outside. We made our way to the closest store, which was just over a mile away. While walking at some point, we noticed that there's a man walking behind us in the same direction. I didn't think much about it at the time, thinking that maybe he was just heading to the same store we were. So I continued chatting with my sister, while the man is behind us, following from a safe distance. We get to the store with no complications, and so does the man behind us. We take our time selecting our candy, get to the register to pay. While I was packing our haul into my backpack, I saw this man buying only a single chocolate bar himself. I thought that was a pretty far way to go for just a chocolate bar, and at this point, my suspicions begin to rise surrounding this guy. I get out of the store with my sister, and we begin making our way back home. We walked for a while, and I quickly glance over my shoulder to see that man once again following us. I take a look at my sister, who seemed totally unaware about the man's presence. We continued our walk, and up ahead of us was an unlit dirt road that continued for a good part of the trip. So I look over my shoulder once again, and that man was still about 60 feet away from us at this point. I was almost certain that he was following us because on our way to the store, he didn't walk this part of the way behind us. The dirt road goes through a forest, and it had a curve at the start of it. Once we hit the curve, I look back once more and notice that I can't see the man, so I assume that he can't see us. At this point, I pull my sister with me into the woods as we duck down behind leaves and logs. My sister is saying something and I just whisper, "Stay quiet," to her as I wait for the man to come down the road. I see his shadow approaching, hear the sound of his footsteps pounding as he walks down the path. He passes our hiding spot by about 10 feet before he stops in his tracks. It looks as if he's looking around, looking for us. Now I'm absolutely certain that he was following us. My heart was racing, and I tried to be as quiet as possible. He didn't find us, instead continuing his trek forward, all the while looking to his left, right, and behind. We stayed in the forest for a while before getting the courage to come out. Once we were sure that he was gone, we walked the rest of the way home with no other problems. Once home, we eat our candy and have a good evening. But this whole experience really did bother me for a while, and it even bothered my sister once I had explained what we had narrowly avoided. Thinking about this still gives me the chills, and the thought of getting caught in that situation creeps me out even more, as I try not to think about it. Since this event, we no longer wait until after dark to do our candy run. If for some reason we can't make it out before the sun goes down, then we just wait for Saturday. And to the man who absolutely tried to follow 2 young girls home one night, I pray that I'm never in a position where I'm actually forced to meet you. I just discovered this forum and thought I'd like to share my own story. This was in 2011, a year after I'd, a female, 22 at the time, graduated college. I was living in my first apartment with a friend of mine. I had adopted the sweetest dog I'd ever had, a runt of the litter Pomeranian, who literally loved every person that she ever met. My nephew was young at the time and would sometimes handle her a little roughly. Sweet kid, but we'd have to correct him and make sure that he didn't hurt the little baby, not realizing how little she was under all that fur. She tolerated this beautifully, without ever nipping or any complaint really. I tell you that to explain a little bit about her temperament. One day, roommate was gone and there was a knock at the door. It was a handyman who said he was there for an annual check on appliances. He was wearing the apartment complex's standard uniform and had a badge, so I didn't really think twice about opening the door for him, even though I hadn't been notified that this would be happening. He comes in, begins chatting and sort of leering. Made me feel uncomfortable right away, but not nearly as freaked out as when my dog came rushing in between us, ears back, teeth bared, and began the growling. He kind of awkwardly laughed and went to pet her. Weird choice for a dog that's baring its teeth at you. She immediately lunged forward like she was going to bite him. He leapt back before she could. Tiny dog, large man, but he was obviously freaked out. At this point, she's straight up barking at him. He asked if I could put her away while he worked, and I lied and said she had separation anxiety. So I recommended that he come back another time, when I could walk her, or when my roommate was there, so one of us could be in a room with her. He looked at me staunchly and asked, "Oh, you have a roommate? I guess I'll just come back then," before backing up, feeling for the door handle, and exiting the apartment. He never turned his back on my dog, or me. A few days go by and I've yet to hear anything from the maintenance team of my building. So when I reach out to the rental office in efforts to reschedule my annual appliance check, I'm met with moments of silence on the other end of the phone, as they tell me that they have no record of our maintenance team ever operating such checks. It's at this point that I inquire about that specific maintenance man that popped into my apartment. They tell me that they don't have anyone on staff that matches this person's description. After making security of the building aware of what happened, they said that they would be on the lookout for anybody matching the details that I gave. And if this person came back to my door, not to answer it. He never did come back, though. As for my furry savior, my dog lived another 7 years and not once did she ever growl at another human being, let alone try to bite one. You hear about dogs being able to read people, so my best guess is that my dog knew that this man only had sinister things intended and did everything in her power to keep that from happening. Good dog. I've always enjoyed coming to Reddit to read other people's creepy life stories, but I never thought in my own life that I'd have a story to share. But that all changed about an hour ago. I'm going to share the story of the encounter and ask y'all to help me ultimately decide if I'm just being paranoid or should exercise some precaution in case of another incident with this individual. I'll start with a description of where it all happened. So first off, the encounter takes place in the bathroom of my boyfriend's apartment in the city. The apartment itself isn't in the heart of the city, though, more in the quieter, outer, suburby area, where there are more houses than apartments. Our apartment is really the only one in the neighborhood, with my boyfriend and I being 2 of the 4 tenants this building has, upstairs and downstairs. We have the upstairs, which includes a small lawn that have steep stairs leading up to a wooden porch or balcony, and the only door to our apartment. The balcony and bathroom window both face towards the backyard areas of the house, with the street being off to the left. Our apartment is high enough we have a clear view of a lot of backyards from there, but we don't really pay much mind to this as everyone respects privacy around here. Finally, the window sits just perfectly in the middle of the bathroom, so anyone watching could see very blatantly inside, the only blind spot being the toilet. The blinds are usually drawn because of this, but at night are left open because the windowsill is loved by my cats. So here's what happened. I slipped away from the movie I was watching with my boyfriend to go to the bathroom quickly. Usually at night, I won't turn the light on in there if it's just going to be a quick visit. Not to get TMI, but that's an important detail. I go to the bathroom, light off for this instance, and once I finish, I stand up and see something out of the corner of my eye that my brain instinctively told me to look at. I'm in full view of the window, lights still off, and I get closer to see a tall, dark hooded figure standing just feet away. The light was on in the yard as he was standing underneath it. He was wearing, and I say he because this was very clearly the build of a young, bulkier man, a black hoodie and sweatpants. His face was covered with what looked to be a surgical mask, and his hood pulled tightly around his face so that I could barely make out his eyes. His body was standing perfectly still, with his hands in both pockets, just facing the window. I got closer to see, as I questioned if he was looking in here, at me. Finally, after what I would guess was a good 20 seconds of me staring at this statuesque man, he slowly lifts his arm and waves. Now, this wasn't a normal greeting type of wave. This was one slow, singular movement, like a windshield wiper only moving to one side in the slowest setting possible. I let out a terrified squeal and dashed from the bathroom to see my boyfriend and our dog following close behind to see the cause of my calamity. I'm speechless. I can barely get out 3 words as I rush towards the door to immediately lock it. Man, watching, outside. My boyfriend in the moment took this as someone was on the porch, so he pushed past me to step onto the porch with our dog. At first he said he didn't see anyone, but once I insisted that there was someone out there, and they must be hiding, he looked for a second time. It was then that he saw the shadow of the man I had seen, standing in between the houses now, with the light casting a shadow just within eyesight. Finally, my boyfriend replied that it must be the guy who owns the house, having a cigarette, and that we'll just shut the curtains and lock the door in case. It's taken me almost an hour to write this. I've slyly peeked out of our other main window multiple times, looking for any sign that that man is still standing out there. There's a single unexplained shadow outside, although it hasn't moved over multiple examinations, so I'm not sure if it's that man or not. My boyfriend no longer believes this hooded man to be the homeowner, due to the fact that he's an elderly man and would have very little reason to be standing outside so late at night, especially given the inclement weather, as it's both rainy and windy this evening. The unsettling thing is that no one would have any reason to be outside this late and for that long, given this neighborhood, plus the weather. Update. We decided to call the police and report this incident. When they arrived, they took our statement and searched the property for the man that we saw. Of course, they found nobody. However, they did find several cigarette butts directly beneath our bathroom window, and a series of pry marks around the frame. The thought now is that the person was either deciding or attempting to gain entry through the bathroom window. When they saw me, they must have frozen in an attempt to not be seen. And when that didn't work, they made a single creepy motion that sent me running. The police said to keep all doors and windows locked and to be on the lookout for anything strange or out of the ordinary. I told them that I'll be keeping all doors and windows locked, all lights on, and the TV volume way up. My hope is that this is enough of a deterrent to keep that man, whoever he was, from coming back and attempting to finish getting in. In the year 2015, I was 19 years old, and I was still living at my parents' house in a small rural village in Germany. One of my closest friends lived only 2 blocks away from my place. My friend and I were both secret smokers. Kinda childish, I know. We often met up at night to have a smoke together in our car before going to sleep, which in hindsight was probably super dumb because both of our parents told us separately, years later, that they could absolutely smell the residue of smoke in our respective cars. It all started by both of us being too afraid to stand in an alley in the dark to smoke. And over time, it became kind of a ritual where we used to talk about life, our day, the usual stuff. We were very close at this time. Well, in December of 2015, I messaged my friend shortly after midnight, asked her if she was willing to meet up for the usual, just have a smoke and talk about some shit. She replied that she was going to pick me up with her car this time. So I stealthily left the house, walked around the corner, jumped into the passenger seat of her car. For more than a month now, we had a new regular spot to park the car and just sit. It was on a dirt road in the forest just outside of town. You might see where this is going and that it's kind of dumb. In September, we were still just parking in an alley in town, but we were spotted once by the parent of a mutual friend, so we decided to go more low-key and picked a new spot outside of town, in the forest that connects our village to the next one. Honestly, the spot was a great mixture of being scary and semi-romantic. It was dead silent in the woods. In rural German forests like that, there are barely any audible animals. It felt great to just sit there with the windows down while talking in a low voice and listening to nothing but silence outside of the car. The latter part will become important rather soon. Less than 5 minutes after I entered the car, we had parked on the small dirt road inside the local forest. Lights off, windows down, no radio. Just sitting with a close friend and almost whispering about whatever was on our mind. We've been sitting there for a few minutes, radio and headlights off, ever since we had parked. The only light inside the car was dim lighting of the onboard computer. By that time, my eyes had adjusted to the darkness. While in conversation, my eyes passed to the mirror on the passenger side door, the right side of the car. In the mirror, I saw a human-like silhouette standing in the distance behind the car, in the shrubbery of the woods, not quite on the dirt road. My first reflex was to freeze. I stayed silent for a few seconds and didn't answer my friend's question, whatever it was. I told her that I could see somebody in the woods behind us. She then laughed loudly. She thought I was bullshitting. But when I remained silent and fixated on the mirror, she realized that I was serious. I looked at her and told her to just drive. There's somebody in the woods with us. She said okay, turned on the car and the lights. She put the car in drive and started to turn the car around 180 degrees to face the road going back to town. When the car faced our intended direction, the lights illuminated the dirt road and surrounding shrubbery. And there was a man, clear as day, standing on the right side of the road. He was barely illuminated for a few seconds before he turned to his left and sprinted off into the woods. The thing that bugs me out about this was he was a fair bit closer than I had first seen him, and he had switched sides. Before we turned the car, he was on the passenger side. But as we made our exit, he was on the driver's side of the car. That plus being closer makes me think that he was in the process of approaching the driver's side door. We drove back to her place and fell asleep after talking about all the possibilities for a while. None of them seemed innocent. I know this doesn't exactly read as being excitingly creepy, at least as some other stories here, but there is something innately terrifying about being in complete darkness and silence, only to have another human suddenly so close by.